Hey, what's going on, peeps? So, a lot of people have come to me, specifically me for some reason, and asking me, just on the transit side of Roblox, right? About why, like, if I could show how I build my stations and, like, how I do certain things. This is all simply to instruct and to show. I know that starting off in the transit community, especially when you're a kid, you know, uh, trying to start your own little groups or whatever, it can get a little difficult to learn things, especially with how stubborn some people are. They don't want to help you and whatnot. So hopefully this will ease that pain, quote unquote. With that in mind, it is worth noting I will try my best to show how I do everything, some of the sources I use, stuff like that. Now, before we continue, I just want to say, gamer, you suck. You're garbage. Okay, no, I'm kidding. That's my staff member. All jokes, no canceling. No, but seriously, this I will try my best to explain everything, starting with just the basic Roblox Studio stuff. It looks hard, but it's really not. It's very simple. There should be no reason why it should be like confusing for anyone. But now we'll begin. So just to start off with, when you load into Studio, which I'm going to leave this place and I won't save it, or actually it doesn't really matter. When you come into Studio, essentially you get a few places you can load in. I usually just use the regular base plate, which now is this with the little tiles on the floor and whatnot. It's a pretty big base plate. You got a good workspace. So to explain, this here, what's in where my mouse is, this is called a workspace, as you can see here in the Explorer. Now, when you start Roblox, you'll have these two things. Usually, when you first open up Studio for the first time, it'll have these two menus. Feel free to arrange this however you want. I have two screens, so like if I want to take this off like this, I can and just have it in another screen. Or if I want to do what I've noticed a lot of people doing, which is putting them both in the same place and just cycling like this, it's also possible. If you want to move one to the other side, you can. Whatever's easier for you. For me, I'm used to the Roblox Studio stock setting, which is this, essentially. So this is how I'm going to build and how I'm going to do everything. So next thing to note, do not go into Studio expecting that everything is going to be easy, because the hardest part would be the dedication towards one project. It's very easy for you to drop any project in a heartbeat, especially when it's, you can tell it's going to take a long time. Now, for this series, the reason, like, what I want to do with this is that people know that CVID currently, for those who played CVID, it's a little bit of a weird game in a way. And the reason I say that is because it only can fit a 5-car NTT, 6-car IRT. It's short. People want longer trains, want all this extra stuff. That's fine. We can do that. Totally okay. So what I will do in this series is that I'll go like step by step, and I'll try to build everything from scratch, or like try to make things myself so that you guys can kind of see the build process behind it. But essentially, whatever I do here, I won't accelerate in like, how do I explain? If I start making this series a full-time thing, where like, okay, anything I do in the series, I will go step by step. So wherever we leave off in one video, that's where we'll pick up in another video. So I won't accelerate anything unless I've already explained it. So like, if we learned how to place a part down and move it, then, I probably will accelerate that later down in the series. So that way you can actually go part by part instead of just skipping through the video expecting to learn everything in 30 seconds. So, yes, throwing shade, because I used to do that same thing. But yeah, so this here is called the workspace. This is called your Explorer, because this is how you explore everything that is in your workspace and all the other services. These things here are called services in a way. Each of them have different settings. So like, for example, workspace, again, this is where all the stuff comes to life, right? You can see that I have my little mega pack here, right? There's also the base plate, which is the piece this is on, this gray piece here. This is called the base plate. And then there's the spawn location. So when I press play, I'll spawn here unless I choose another option. There's players, which this has to do with, of course, you guessed it, your players. You got your respawn time. And essentially everything here that you see on this has a separate menu, like its own little, properties and things you can change. Now, the properties tab is pretty self-explanatory. It's the properties of what you have selected. So this works with anything. If I select the camera, here are all the properties for the camera. If I select terrain, here are all the properties for the terrain. If I select workspace, here are all the properties for the workspace. It's that simple. It just shows you what information is available for what you selected and shows you what you can and can't change. Nothing more complicated than that. Don't know what this thing is called, but if you're trying to make textures, which in the future we will, hopefully, this will become very useful. So this, I will probably use this a lot when creating textures, but not when I'm really just building. So just keep that in mind. My goal is to not make any video longer than 20 minutes. So if this goes past 20 minutes, yikes. Okay. To start, we will begin with just the very basic Studio keybinds and some of the basic things that you can do in Studio. When you start in Studio, you are automatically placed into the select tool. This means that I can select anything that isn't locked. So I can select spawn point. I can click and drag it around. I can press Control Z to undo that, or just this little arrow up here, right up here. So this is called the select tool. As I said previously, if things are locked, okay, you will not be able to select them. The base plate is locked to prevent you from moving this. And this is perfect because if you're working on something on the base plate, which right now, this is our ground. You can think of this like the ground in your house. You don't want for you to accidentally select the base plate and then move it and then have to undo it every time you accidentally click it, especially with Roblox's hitboxes for certain things. So keep this in mind. This is locked. If you want to unlock something, you can click it, which in this case is the base plate, and you could just click right here. It says locked. You turn this off, and now, well, you can't really see it because it's so big, but I can essentially drag this anywhere I want. You can also use the lock tool, which is Alt-L. Now you see my little cursor has like a little lock on it, and you can see that this is locked, but the spawn isn't. So I can click that, press Alt-L again to remove it, and I selected my base plate. Again, it's not moving because it's so big, but if I was to zoom out and just like, okay, well, you know what I mean. It's humongous. That's why it's not moving. So back here, the next tool is called the move tool. Now, if you don't want to use keybinds or anything like that, you'd rather just click them. Under the home tab here, you have these tools. This is what we're referring to now. Okay. Select, move, scale, rotate. These are what we're going to go through first before we move on to anything else that's on the home page. This, when you click this, if it's closed for you, when you click it, like it'll stay open until you select something, which is perfect, and you click out of it, right? But if you want this to stay up, you can double click something, or at least you used to be able to. Now you have to click this little arrow, and it'll stay stuck onto here. No matter what you do, it'll always be there. Now, the keybind for the select tool, not that you would really use it as much, but if you need to select something quickly, is Control 1, okay? The move tool is Control 2, scale is Control 3, rotate is Control 4. You could see how simple it really is. And there's also another trick, which I'll show you now, because in the future when you're developing, you're going to want to know this, especially for transit games. So this feature is called, well, I don't really know what it's called, but it's essentially, if you have an Alt key, it's a little key that says ALT, okay, Alt. If you have that key on your keyboard, it basically ungroups everything for you without ungrouping it. Now, I haven't explained what grouping is, but essentially, do you see all this stuff here, right? This is all in a model, as you can see right here. I can't even speak. These three little parts here, this is called the model. And in the model, there's more models with stuff that I can select. So, you see, I can select this. But Alt, essentially, when I'm trying to select something, you see, I select this whole model as a whole, right? But if I hold Alt, right, and I'm going to try to hover over something so that you can see. If I hold Alt, I can select anything, regardless of if it's in a model or not. So why you would need to use this is if you're trying to select something in particular. So say I'm working on a station and I want to get this mesh, or not mesh, but like gothy, dirty ass like texture. I can do that just by selecting Alt And it works with selecting decals, which if you have a part with a decal on it, you double click it and it'll select it, as you can see here. So now that we've discussed the alt, we can try and talk about the move tool. So the move tool, again, control 2, right? You won't see it unless you have something selected. So if I select this, this is our move tool. Now, before we continue, there's something that you need to know. There's 2 ways of movement with Roblox, and that is the local movement and the world movement. So local movement corresponds to the part. So this part is basically right now adjacent to how our world is. So you see the base plate, how these pieces go this way and this way, right? This is our world right here. This is what our world is like. Now, if I rotate the base plate, this would be inaccurate, but essentially we will use the base plate as an example as to what we're doing here. Now, this is called local movement. You can see the little L is here. So I will basically move corresponding to this part, okay? So if I go like this, you can see I'm moving because the part is this direction. Now, if I use the rotate tool, which we'll skip to, which is control 4, or you could just click up here. If I rotate this like this, you can see now that my local movement, again, corresponds to this part. So I can move like this now. Instead of moving left, right, up, down, now I'm moving kind of in a diagonal, kind of sideways kind of way, right? Now I'm going to undo that real quick. We're going to do this. Now, or actually, I'll redo it so that we can get this shape. Now, say something is like this, but you don't want to locally move it because for some reason you need to place a train on a different track, but the train is rotated, anything like that. Easy solution, you press Control L, and now you're going off of your world movement, in which case, no matter the rotation, I can move according to the world. This applies to any model or any part. Now, the part where it gets a little confusing is the fact that we have this little circle here. Not everyone has this enabled, I believe, but this little circle is called a pivot. It's basically kind of like an anchor point of something. And with that, you can move the pivot now. You can see it right here, edit pivot, snap. And I'll explain these just because they have to do with the move tool. But essentially, our pivot basically determines where we move from. Now, because of the pivot point update, if you have a model like a train, a 5-car train, you would have to go to where the pivot point is, which is usually in the middle of the train. Now, if you're trying to get a precise movement to like get the train at the very end of a platform or something like that, going to the middle and then going back and forth is a bit of a tedious process. So what you can do to combat that is either edit the pivot, which is what we can do here by pressing the edit pivot. When this is enabled, you get all these little things, which is the move, rotate, all combined into one, right? You can use this to move this to the front of the train where you can move it from there and get your precise movements. So in the event of this spawn point, right, and as an example, I can move the pivot up here, right? And I'm going to just move it like to right here, for example, right? So now you can see that it's off center, but now if I'm trying to get a precise movement on this, like right there, you can see now I'm right on the line. Perfect, right? Literally made it easier for me instead of having to go to the middle of this, which is a terrible example because this is small anyways, but you essentially get the point. Now, you can reset the pivot on anything by pressing the reset button. Okay, very simple. And then there's the snap. This is very simple in a way. What snap really does is like, well, I mean, it really explains it, but like it'll attach your pivot to a corner or like an edge or anything like that. So like if you want the pivot to be at the very, very edge of like a train coupler or something like that, or like at the very end of a wall, this would be perfect for you because then you have it right there, right? You know exactly where your pivot is. Once you see that your pivot is right in the middle of like between two couplers, then you know you're good, right? So these are all options that you can use. And if you're trying to move something as well, without like the whole world or local rotation, or if something, you just need to rotate something accordingly, right? But you don't want to use the localized movement of a certain part. With the pivot update, you can just rotate it like this. And now I can move this, right? Oh, hold up. Let me turn pivot off. I can move this according to my pivot point. So this is still local movement because only this pivot is rotated for this part. Now, if I reset it again, like I said, it goes right back to normal according to the part's geography in a way. So with that in mind, we've gotten the pivot part out. Now, there is, there you go. There is the scale tool. It's very simple. And before I continue, you see how this is green, blue, and red? These are called axes, or axis, however you pronounce it. which is AXIS, axes. And essentially, each of them have a designed letter, okay? There's X, which is the red, Y, which is the height. You can think of it that way, and Z. Because this part is like this and height corresponds to this correctly, doesn't mean that your part will always be like this. Meaning, if I rotate my part this way, for example, do you see how now my Z-axis, which used to be my long axis in a way, now is my height? So this does not correspond to the world, but it can. If you press Control L, well, not really for this part, but for models, it can. So now you got that. This also works with the pivot point update in a way. So there's the Y, there's the Z, there's the X right there, just like that. These are called your axes. Explained. Perfect. Then there's the rotate tool. Again, follows the same principle of the axis. There's the Y, which in this case would be rotational this way because of how the part is placed. There's a Z or Z, however you pronounce it, and the X, which is the red one. You could rotate these freely or unfreely depending on what you have in your snap to grid. Snap to grid is a feature from Roblox which you can't see in the home page, but you can see in the model page. This is called snap to grid right here, as you can see. You can turn these on or off to get free movements, essentially. Now, when you're building, I would highly recommend that you have this on, but probably to a small number for you to make really small changes to things. The reason is, if you have these off, which I'm going to show you, if I bring this down to 0.1, right? You can see that now my movements are very precise. They're only going to extend 0.1 of each, okay? See that? Perfect, right? Now, if I have this off, I can move it freely, no matter how much, how little. But here's the problem with this. This would probably be ideal if you don't really care, like if it's like something in the background or a wall that you're just trying to connect, that's fine. But there's no guarantee that you'll get precise numbers, as you can see here in the properties tab. So me doing this doesn't mean I'll get perfect numbers. And when you're building something like a subway station, imperfections are nice, but they're very noticeable if you do them wrong, especially when you're doing something like, let's say, 145th Street Station, which is on a grade, which means it's like elevated, like it's not elevated, but like the station is slowly getting higher in elevation in a way. You can see it, right? And so when you're building a station, and when I'm building stations in the future, you'll see that I'll have snap to grid on to a very low number, just so that we could get those precise movements. The same thing could be done with the rotate tool, right? Usually when you come into Roblox, it's set to 15, which is basically kind of like you're using a protractor in a way. So you see it's very precise movements all the way around. The snap to grid movement feature works the same way with the scale and the move tool. So I can move very precise amounts. This way, your numbers stay very, very perfect in a way. Now, with that in mind, snap to grid, if you have it off, especially when you're building something like a train, it's gonna look bad. And the reason I say that is because with a train, you essentially mirror what you do on the left side to the right. So if you're building without precise movements and you're just guessing essentially how much you want to move something, later down the line, it may look bad. Now, all developers usually who use Roblox's movements and stock generic tools essentially will use the snap to grid for their own, reasons, unless they're trying to make something a little not so perfect or just move something to a location. Doesn't really matter where exactly it is. But for stuff like platforms or stations where the beams are evenly spread out, this would be perfect for you. So for example, in 145th Street Station in C via D, the beams are separated by, I believe, 25 to 30 studs each. So because of that, there's a perfect distance, a perfect length between each beam, instead of you having to guess with your eyes where it should belong. So with that example in mind, that pretty much sums this video at all. There's other things as well, like collisions, which is very simple what collisions does. All this does is that when I duplicate something, for example, or if I try to move something inside of something else, it kind of prevents me. So if I put this part right here, you can see I can't move. I cannot move into this part. This is good for some examples, but not really for train building, because you need to be able to move into other stuff. With collisions off, you can see I could freely move in and out, and if I duplicate, it duplicates right in the same position. With collisions, though, it's the opposite. If I duplicate, it puts it right on top because of the collision thing. And joint surfaces, never use this at all. Make sure you have this off because this will kill your game. Reason being, we have stopped using this for our trains and stuff. There's no reason why this should be on, or else your stuff will start to connect with each other and it may cause problems down the line. with that in mind, that concludes the video. Later, losers.